Welcome to Living in Color. I'm your host, Farah Nasser, and today we're talking about what it's like traveling as a person of color. This includes having your name on a no-fly list, having people approach you to touch your hair, sometimes without your permission, and more. Today, I'm joined by the co-founder of No Fly List Kids, Khadija Cajee, as well as travel blogger Jessica Ufuoma. Thank you so much both for being here and for joining us. So I'm going to start with you, Khadija, because you have an interesting personal story that involves travel with your son. Tell us about it.
So my son is now 10, but since he was born, he's been flagged on Canada's no-fly list. So essentially, he's a name match to somebody who's on that list. And since he was born, we've had trouble when we travel with him by air.
So since he was what? How old?
The first time we flew with him was when he was 6 weeks old. And I have two older kids, never had any issues before that. And suddenly we were being stopped at the airport. He was being security screened, and we didn't know, actually they wouldn't tell us which one of us was being screened. They would just stop the entire family. And once they worked out whatever they had to on their end, they'd let us go. It was when he was 18 months old we realized that it was actually one of the agents was sympathetic enough to tell us that it was him that was actually flagged because she herself was so much in shock.
That he was so little.
Yeah.
And at 6, what happened when he was 6 years old?
So when he was 6 years old, actually, again, same thing, checking in at the airport. He was traveling from Halifax to Toronto. My husband, again, was with him and encountered the same situation and managed to get a picture of the check-in agent's screen that showed that my son's name and designated high profile. So essentially, you know, the 6-year-old is
a risk to society.
Yes, exactly. Wow. So he took a picture of it and tweeted it out, and it sort of took a life of its own. We started getting contacted by all these other parents who had children in similar situations. Right. And co-founded a group called No Fly List Kids and started advocating on this issue because we thought it was just so absurd.
It's ludicrous. Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, let me turn it over to you because you love traveling.
I do.
And you travel, you say as a woman of color, you have certain challenges when you travel and you kind of dress the part. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I find that as a woman of color, every time I travel, I always stand out by reason of my skin color, of course. And I find that people are constantly looking at me or taking pictures of me. And sometimes it almost feels like I am the attraction as opposed to the person that we
You're the tourist attraction,
exactly.
Right?
And, you know, I could be in the most beautiful place, for example, in Thailand, Grand Palace, which is like studded with gold. But I'm the attraction. I'm the one that they want to come and take pictures with. Almost as if I was maybe like a spectacle, for example. And because of that, I find that every time I'm traveling, I'm very conscious about that, and I want to change some outfits that I wear as opposed to wearing color. I love to wear color, but sometimes I wear, you know, black colors or like neutral colors just so I cannot stand out as much as I want to. That sometimes helps because I'm able to blend in a bit more. But in general, it's just sometimes uncomfortable because I want to go somewhere and experience the place, but I don't want any of those inconveniences of people just touching me or just like looking at me like I was an outcast, you know. So I find that that really influences my outfit choices, for example.
And you've had experiences where people have touched your hair. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I've had moments, several moments when people come up to me and just touch my hair and just sometimes even ask me questions like, where are you from? What are you doing here? I don't know why they will do that, but obviously my skin color maybe draws them to me, and it's sometimes very uncomfortable because, you know, like I said, I just want to have a good time when I travel as opposed to being an attraction or just having people come up to me and interrupt my activities. So it gets a bit tricky sometimes, but I've found that those moments are great for me to just educate them and teach them about my culture. And sometimes it's not from a malicious standpoint, but if you weren't used to that kind of thing happen to you in your country, for example, you might be taken aback by it. So
what did they just grab it and
they just grab my hair and just touch it and just say, what is this? How did you make it? How long did it take you to make? Or just ask me so many like interesting questions. And sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I'm not open to it. And sometimes I just tell them what it is.
Well, yeah, and it's exhausting to also have to keep explaining it sometimes.
It's exhausting, exactly. When you do it for the first person, it's okay, but when you have to do it
to you often
it's very uncomfortable.
So it get exhausting.
So I think right now, because I've traveled a lot quite often, and I feel a lot more comfortable because I know what to expect. But usually, like the first few times when I traveled, I was so embarrassed sometimes because I just didn't feel very comfortable with people just coming to touch me or just take pictures of me. Sometimes they don't even ask for permission. They just stand in the corner and take pictures of me. And I'm like, oh, what's going on, right? But now I'm more open to it.
You're more open to it.
Yeah.
Let's go back to no-fly list kids. So what are some of the things that you're advocating for? You're trying to make change with the government to, I guess, bring attention to these children. How many children are on this list?
So, I mean, hundreds that we know of. We actually started advocating on this issue 3.5 years ago when my husband got a picture of that screen. And since all those parents contacted us, we formed the group and we started our advocacy efforts. So we have come quite far, actually. We've, there's new legislation in place now dealing with this issue. So the entire system will be redesigned and hopefully implemented in about a year's time. Hopefully what that means is that these children's names will be removed from the list. That's our hope. At the very least, people who find themselves falsely flagged will be able to have a mechanism by which they can get themselves removed from the list. Currently, that mechanism doesn't exist. So, I mean, it's been a very long 3.5 years. It's taken up many, many hours of our time, free time. It's almost like a second job. But yeah, I mean, we just felt we had to do it, be going through this.
How did you talk to him about this? I mean, how do you explain this to a child?
Yeah, so when he was 6, I mean, we didn't really say much to him. He was obviously curious about what was going on, why were all these news, cameras coming to our house, and why are mom and dad on TV all the time. And a couple of times he was actually, his picture was in the paper as well. So we tried to just give him an explanation that a 6-year-old would understand. As he started getting older, he started gaining more of an understanding of it. So still, we allow him to ask the questions and then just try to give answers. As long as he's satisfied with the answers we give, we're good. We don't go into too much detail because I don't really want him to grow up with that stigma hanging over him, that he had this, this sort of like flag on him. I don't want him to grow up with that hanging over him.
Of course, and the other issue is growing up. I mean, a kid is one thing, but if he's an 18-year-old, a 23-year-old, and governments change, and somehow he still is on the, I mean, that must be a huge concern to you.
Definitely, because obviously we know a lot of teenage boys, actually some who have now become adults since, we've met them, and we know from their experiences that as they get older, the security screenings become increasingly invasive. So when they're little babies, or even my son's age 10, it's just a matter of getting the agent to clear their name for check-in. When they get older, they don't look so young anymore. They look maybe a little bit like adults or whatever. They start getting pulled aside for secondary questioning at security, and getting pulled aside to the extent where they've missed flights and have been held up for hours with their families. That can become really scary. Some of the boys actually have refused to fly until this matter is resolved because they're afraid of what might happen to them if they go to international destinations. Some of them are adults now and still are waiting until the new system is implemented because they're just afraid.
That must be really terrifying to think about how because Canada, I mean, you're from here, there's some comfort there, but international destinations being on this list, I mean, that anything can happen.
You just never know. When you're in a foreign jurisdiction, you just never know what can happen, right? So, and some of them don't want to take the risk.
Do you have any safety concerns in terms of being a woman of color when you're traveling? Like, I'm not even talking photographs, I'm just talking about safety.
Yes. I do get sometimes scrutinized. I can maybe, for example, get taken to a room for extra checks. I've had that happen to me a lot. And I would find that it's not, I usually ask, why are you taking me to this room? Is there anything, because I have proper documentation, so why do I need to be taken through all of these rigors just so I can get to a new country I'm trying to experience? So I do have some safety concerns as a woman of color, and there are times when I could, for example, go to a place and not feel very safe because I get this stare. So I'm wondering what's next. Like, are you coming to meet me? I just get that. I just get scared and afraid of people just coming to meet me and asking me questions or questioning me. So I do have safety concerns, as opposed to, sometimes you just want to go to a new place and experience it and not feel like you're in danger of any sorts. But when you have someone even literally follow you to where you're going to, like walk behind you, especially males, it gets very concerning.
You mentioned also that to us earlier, that when you were in a bus once, they stopped the bus and tried to see if your passport was real or fake. Tell us about that.
Exactly. So again, I get people do that a lot to me, and this particular instance was in Mexico, and I was in a bus. We're just going to a different city, and then they came up to me, asked me for my passport to see if it was real and fake. And at that time, I had a different hairstyle, so as a woman of color, sometimes I'll
Right.
change my hairstyle. So it was like, oh, this is not really you. I'm like, this is me. And then I had to show a different ID with the matching hairstyle that I
Right,
had
to
on
make
that
sure
day
they
to make
understood.
sure. Yeah, so it's things like that, little things like that, that maybe other people will get away with that I'm not able to get away with.
Khadija, what advice do you have? I mean, you have traveled quite a bit with your family as well. What advice do you have for people of color who are traveling, who might be a little bit concerned to travel? And do you feel, I mean, that it is actually an issue, or that people of color are treated differently when they are traveling?
We've been contacted by families from all different backgrounds, right? So in that sense, we do know that people from all different backgrounds are impacted on this list. However, definitely it is disproportionately towards people of color, disproportionately towards people with Arabic-sounding names. You know, it is the sort of like stigma, this marginalization that exists around these kinds of names, right? I would encourage anybody who feels like they may be unfairly impacted on this list, definitely engage your public officials, like contact your MP, contact public safety, contact us. I mean, we can always give advice. You know, we have a Twitter handle, we have a website. We've helped a lot of people along the way, and there are mechanisms now being put in place to deal with these kinds of issues. Just speaking up, you know, it can accomplish a lot.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a big world out there. There's so much to see, and it's a shame if people were to feel unsafe. I mean, it's understandable, but it is, I think, doing your research, knowing what you're getting into when you're getting into it is something, but it really hopefully will not be limiting for a lot of people, or feel like it's not limiting. I mean, I'm sure you've inspired some people, Jessica, who might not consider getting out there to travel. So thank you both so much for being on Living in Color and sharing your stories with us.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks for watching Living in Color. Thank you for watching Living in Color. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have an idea for a future Living in Color episode, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave them in the comment section.